with anything being modular is you do end up with some happy accidents, things that you would have never come across or potentially never come across during even my random generation. That's
Yeah.
that's one of the key things
I
there.
mean, also just playing with materials, and I put in gem and bone just to see what would happen, and we ended up with some really cool looking weapons. I'd say we could run the generator on your side because it'll look better. We just have to put in the randomize line because I forgot to put it. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this algorithm last week, but basically, if the two materials that it's looking for are the same, it'll say pure, which is done 2 in a row, which I'm a little worried about. One more time? No, okay, fine. That was a coincidence. So here, gold and steel, right? So gold is the outside, and steel is the inside. So the damage is not very good because gold doesn't have a lot of damage, and the value is not very good because steel isn't that expensive. So this is not a great weapon, but a steel and gold sword would be much better. So you can get some really nice ideas. Like I've got Weithril, which is green, and Lilacian, which is purple, and you just end up with assets that you wouldn't necessarily have made. But we also have to deal with things like the pommel. The pommel, if you're not sure, is the roundy bit at the bottom of the hilt, and it's the counterweight to the sword. And those are being randomly selected too, and the material is being applied from the available materials. But we have to have them moving depending on where they need to go. So each hilt is a different size. We can't use the same origin as the handle and the hilt. So now we need a system for moving those.
Yeah.
If Michael had just generated 200 swords in Blender and given me a file of 200 swords, none of that would be necessary. So the decisions we make at the beginning are having impact on how that work goes through.
A wood and copper sword. I want that in
7
Minecraft
damage.
now.
7 damage.
I do like
Worth 11 gold. This is a toy.
Essentially, yes. So yes, there's lots to be thought about right at the very beginning, and obviously we also went over a stretch goal, which is absolutely awesome. But that also moves more things in that we didn't think we were going to be doing, sadly, but we are. So that's awesome.
So I think it's worth talking about how we decided to solve this, because procedural weapons came in quite late. Procedural armor is also come in, although we haven't started working on that yet. We're using the techniques we're learning from this for the armor.
Yeah.
And there are various ways you could do this, right? You could just have a number of swords, and then you put in a material, and then you randomly select a name and a particle effect. We could have done that. We decided to go with modular swords. Michael, would you like to talk about your side of that? Like why that felt like a good decision for you?
Yes, so I'm lazy. So if I can do something a couple of times and end up with a vast variety from it, then it's going to be a winner all out. Now, hopefully, one of these blend files works. No, I've moved my weapons file. I'm not going to try and find it live. Oh, actually, I know where it is. So yeah, I'll
Is your camera reversed?
It might be.
It's changed.
I don't know.
The microphone's on a different side. So carry on.
I don't know what's going on. Anyway, let me open the weapon file within Blender itself. It's taken me a few seconds to go through, but yeah, essentially, you can sit down, you can design weapons, and you can get them working with, well, basically however you want. But essentially, if something's made from parts and those parts are standard, making an object suddenly be modular is not that difficult to do. Let me just set up this blend file, and I need my OBS so I can switch over to my scene. If I do this with a small head, hopefully you guys can see me. Awesome. So this is our basic file. We've got a series of blades inside a collection called blades, and we'll be using that to build the sword, essentially. And we've got the origin, as Jan was saying earlier, of both the blade, and we've called this hilt, but I think the hilt.
I mean, it's the hilt, it's the cross guard, and it's the grip. So if you want to get technical, we've lumped them all in together as hilt.
Yes, and they've all got associated empties with them because the empties are necessary for Yan to line up where the pummel ends up going,
Hmm.
which is, well, it's pretty awesome. So we've got a hilt collection there, and then we've also got a pummel collection, which looks like they're turned off. So hold on a second. There we go. So we've got a load of pummels, and they have their origin there because once again they're placed using the empties, and then we're actually going to use geometry nodes to run through and generate a particular shape. So if I hide out the way the blades, the hilt, and the pummel, and then we've got a weapon here, and this weapon has been randomly put together and generated using geometry nodes. If we click on it here, we get a nice setup here, and what we will end up doing is working through each individual one. I think this one doesn't go too deep into well, it's not too difficult. It's not a massive deep layer of nodes. Once you've learned how to do one, you can very easily do another. I'm trying to come up with a better way of doing a bit of randomness at the moment. I'm not entirely happy with the way. Unfortunately, if you pick a random value in Blender within the geometry nodes itself, it's the same random value of the seeds the same. So it's not a different value every
So
time.
you need to randomize it. You need a randomize function.
And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to link it to the actual frame that you're on. So it's got a different starting seed basically every time. And in that case, the issue there is it's then got a temporal component to it. But if you're doing an animation and still want random stuff, suddenly that becomes very difficult because you can't do one and the other. So I'm still sort of like burying my head in the weeds trying to get that out there. And eventually, I'll leave this in a state that it was runnable because I was working on it. We've got a script here that will run through a range of weapons. So we can come in here and say, I want 5 weapons. And I just click play. And if my script is working, which it would be a miracle if it was, I just, I think it's worked. I think if I go into D, this is the mess, by the way, I was talking about earlier, current projects, and go into weapons, what I should find is a folder, a GLB, with 5 different weapons in. And each one of these weapons, all being well, no, I have done something that broke it. I thought it might be the case. But all being well, once it's not completely broken, we'll have 5 separate weapons. So, oh, this one looks like it worked. Perhaps it was just the first one that came across. There's another randomly generated one and another one. So we'll be going through the process of actually randomly generating it so you can output random stuff and just use it over in Godot or any engine that you want. The course itself, when it comes out later on towards the end of this month, we will have basically your ability to export to any engine that you want. It doesn't have to be a GLB. I've picked that because that's compatible with Godot. But that's the main thing, being able to have it so it's platform agnostic as well. And then if you wanted to, you could give someone the coder of your team, or you, if you're wearing that hat, you can just pick up your mesh pieces, randomly generate them in Engine, or randomly generate them in Blender. Really
because some
straightforward.
solutions are right for some games and not for others. I'm going to pick up on something you said earlier,
Yeah.
right at the beginning of this, when I said, do you want to talk through why you felt it was the right for you from your side? You said, because I'm lazy. And there's something very interesting in the book Procedural Generation in Game Design, which is Boop. We'll come back to this month. Mikey, you said the course coming out this month. You better tell them which course, because otherwise they're going to think all of the courses are coming out this month, and I'm not dealing with that. Okay, so in Procedural Generation in Game Design, one of the first questions they ask is, why should you use Procedural Generation, or when should you? And a bad reason for doing it is it's going to save me time. It probably isn't. It might, but the amount of tweaking you'll need to do in the scripting and wherever you're doing Procedural Generation to get the kind of results you actually want to use is not actually going to be shorter than handcrafting everything necessarily. Yes. But if we want a game where we have a certain aesthetic in the game, and we want the game to feel and look a certain way, but we want to have the excitement of, oh, I've not seen this particular sword before, or I really like this one, I'm keeping it, or this is highly cool and
Yeah,
massively overpowered, I'm not selling this.
yeah,
We also want the situation in our game where I've just picked up a bunch of swords that do no damage but are worth a crap ton of money. I'm going to use these to buy upgrades for my town.
yeah, totally. And
Michael, what's this month's business?
so they ran the procedural weapons in Blender, of course.
Thank you.
um, yeah, I mean, I said to be lazy, and that's because I've got a bit of hindsight of making procedural stuff, and therefore I fully appreciate if you needed to make like 5 different swords, doing it procedurally is not going to save you time. In fact, it's going to probably take longer. Most procedural things take a lot longer to do than doing it manually. The benefit of procedural generation comes when you have to produce hundreds of them or you need to vary something very quickly. Because if something's procedurally put together, let's say a skyscraper, I've done procedural skyscraper before. So you do a skyscraper and you've manually put on, let's say, details like air vents and balconies and things like that. And someone comes along and says, can we have some more of those? And you just drag a slide and go bloop, and it's done if you've done it procedurally. Otherwise, it's a bit slower if you've done it manually. And suddenly someone says, oh, can we have it 5 stories tall instead of 6? Again, with a slider, you can pull it back down. So if you're in a position where you need to make lots of something and that something has to be varied, then using procedural generation is a great way of approaching it. Certainly when it comes to modeling. When it comes to gameplay design and features, then or level design and procedural level design, that it has its other reasons like replayability.
Yeah, from a gameplay point of view, things like replayability, if it's built right into the core design of the game, just like multiplayer should be, right? This is a decision you make right at the beginning, because trying to make this work later is really problematic. I can see an instance of playing this RPG where you find a sword that is just really cool or perfect for that situation, or you go hunting, you really want one with certain materials because you know it's going to be really good in this dungeon.
Yeah.
I could see that as being part of the game, but tacking it on at the end doesn't actually add anything to the game. It has to be part of that journey. So a system whereby a certain shopkeeper might be giving extra discounts on or paying extra money for certain materials, for example. You can also get some really interesting things with the way we're using materials as well as meshes, because our weapons are procedure generated on a couple of different axes. So that when we're making axes, for example, certain axes might have detailing in the secondary material on the first material, right? So you can start getting some really cool styles in there. There's also a lot more we can do with the procedural generation of the weapon, but that's something that we should experiment with, see what's possible, and then have the discussion. And that's really what's key here, is then Michael and I have to sit down and say, okay, so we want to do procedural generation. We've decided modular weapons is the way we want to go.
Yep.
So what does the workflow for the assets look like? Right? Because if I've now added in this thing where the order of the materials is going to make a material gameplay difference, then where do we go from there?
And it might not even be or just the materials that can make a difference. You could actually have models making a difference too. I could quite easily see a system in where you can expand what we're going to be teaching you so that you make, let's say, 5 varieties of blade or axe head, but then you give them levels of wear. So you actually put chips and chinks and in actually damage in there, where you swap out the actual mesh itself depending on the state of the weapon. Now you might not actually have a health to the weapon, but you could do. That's in a lot of RPGs. I mean, even Minecraft's got it, so you wear out a sword eventually. So you could change out the model like that. But that would also mean you could randomly generate loot, which meant that when you picked it up, it could have a different state of repair as well. And that may alter the value accordingly.
Yep.
So there's lots you can do with that. It's really exciting.
And there's also things like, we at the moment have 3 classes of player character, right?
Yep.
We have the is it adventurer or explorer, the mage, and the warrior. So one-handed sword, a wand or a two-handed sword.
Yeah.
We could do it so that the impact those materials are having is going to be different for each of those classes. So, for instance, the materials being used in a wand might be what the primary and secondary spells are.
Yes.
As opposed to the kind of damage it does. Which, from a sort of lore, and we're not really working on lore in this game, but from a lore perspective, has some really interesting implications, right? The materials you're using are what magic you get.
Yes. I mean, I thought that would be a very nice twist on it doesn't matter the abilities of a particular mage. So they don't learn how to do a fireball spell, so to speak. They have to have a fire wand in order to do fire spells, a water wand to do water, etc. The standard tropes in there.
Yep. So yeah, that's the kind of decisions we need to make. And then we need to go on to what's the size of each mesh.
Yep.
Because there's got to be a maximum and a minimum size for these things. If only because the way that they're being held. What's the order of materials?
Yep.
We've decided we're not texturing. But if we were texturing, that's going to be a whole different kettle of fish, ball of wax, a ball of waxy fish, kettles. Help.
Carry on.
that was it.
I'm watching from the sidelines.
And then we need to get them in such a way that we can actually generate a bunch. And I still need to figure out a good way to get them actually working in game. Because at the moment, the way our weapons work is a weapon is not a single thing. Well, there is a weapon class that has all the information about the weapon. I need to rewrite that to deal with which mesh are you, what type are you, what meshes are you using, what are the materials. Right now, we're not doing things like special flame effects, or we're not naming our weapons, so I don't have to worry about those. We've got the mesh body weapon, which is the one that's held in your hand and does damage. And then we've got the physics body weapon, which is the one that you drop on the floor and responds to physics. So we would need a way, we're going to need a way, of taking these modular weapons, such as Roderick's sword that procedurally turns into a battle axe.
It's not a bug,
one,
it's a
it
fixture.
has to be consistent. And two, if we're doing a roguelite, there should be a system whereby you can leave that weapon to the next character.
Yes.
So now we have to generate that between saves.
Especially if it's an epic, well, you have to keep what it is. So how that's stored, there are numerous ways you could store it. Like, is it a certain seed that gets stored? Or do you just bake it out?
Right. Do you make a file? Do you like save it as a probably not a JSON, but some sort of binary file? I would probably go with a seed or a code. So the first 2 digits would be which mesh is for the blade, or what type it is. Second 2 would be, or the first digit would be what type it is. The second 2 would be which meshes are we using.
Yeah.
Even that wouldn't work. But I'd probably go with that. So that all I need to do is in the save file, just save strings of characters.
That are not human readable, but you can edit them for fun.
Which means if you ever patch the game and add more stuff in, you potentially break everyone's weapons.
Yes.
Potentially. So yeah, there's a lot to sort of look at there. And part of it is, now that we've got these in, I need to have a workflow whereby if Michael gives me 60 different blades, as a random example, that should be as easy to make a bunch of different weapons that work in inventory, generate icons, which is a whole other thing we need to talk about.
Yep.
And can be dropped in the world and used and looted and sold and bought. Like, it needs to work within all these systems.